Hey ha ya hey ha ya hey ya hey ha yo hey yo hey yo hey ha ya hey ya ya hey ya hey ha yo hey yo hey yo hey ha ya 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 hey ha yo hey yo hey yo Fort Beck Community College Uki Epino yo yo me too gashi dagush kashka yogi piano yo yo wata pebi hagik tabi ichachi ya bino hey yo hey yo hey ha ya hey ha ya hey ya hey ha yo hey yo hey yo hey ha ya hey ya yo hey ha yo hey yo hey yo hey ha ya hey ha ya hey ha ya hey ha ya hey yo hey yo hey yo Fort Beck Community College Ugi Epino yo yo me too gashi dagush kashka yogi piano yo yo wata pebi hagik tabi ichachi ya bino hey yo hey yo hey ha ya hey ha ya hey ya hey ha yo hey yo hey yo hey ha ya hey ya yo hey ya hey ha yo hey yo hey yo hey ha ya hey ha ya hey ha ya hey ha ya hey ha hey yo hey yo Fort Beck Community College Uki Epino yo yo me too gashi dagush kashka yogi piano yo yo wata pebi hagik tabi ichachi ya bino hey yo hey yo hey ha ya hey ha ya hey ya hey ha yo hey yo hey yo hey ha ya hey ya yo hey ya hey ha yo hey yo hey yo hey ha ya hey ha ya hey ha ya hey ha hey ho hey yo hey yo Fort Beck Community College Uki Epino yo yo me too gashi dagush kashka yogi piano yo yo wata pebi hagik tabi ichachi ya bino hey yo
Homadakuipi. Ke yushke wan chen kampichan. Te was there you na pictures up do. Elijah Hopkins demie. Wana wak chinja wak pa. Dechia daya hipido madakuipi. Hello everyone, and again welcome to Fort Peck Community College. We are streaming to you live here again with our guest speaker, Tahanshi, Mr. Jeremy Red Eagle, again joined by our Dekshi, known throughout Indian country uncle to many, Mr. Tommy Christian, is in the house again. So, and together we're going to discuss Indigenous language acquisition. You know, it's I guess a fancy term to just discuss our Indigenous languages, Dakota, Nakota, Lakota. And I think all these gentlemen here on the Zoom call here today have some interesting take on it. They're speakers, and they utilize it to make their the connection with the creator, to pray. And so I think it's a good discussion. I think our students and our community really benefit from having a good thorough discussion. And so per usual, I ask Dekshi if you would share a prayer with us in a good way before we get started here.
Tushka, Diana, okay, Nahan, Diana Chano. Hamidaki epidaya hipi ushima lekchewi chashamelo naha. Ambe tukilea chante taoa glake na omakia wachekia. Atukashila na wakantaka teteya toba unchi makana makaina. Na kumitaki epi wanagi makpea kta hocho ka kta hilpo. Nichope unshia kenitaki epi naha gnagupta hecha naha. Owichakia po ushiwichalapo. Atukashila wakantaka kiksiapo mitaki epi wanukchalapi wichakchalapi wakajapi hokshila winchinchalapi na koshkapi na wikoshkapi chanku washte upi wichozani upi okia wo ushi wichalapo. Atukashila wakantaka oyate uyasi chanku luta alga omani o wichakiapo ushi wichalapo. Kiksiapo mitaki epi agichita oyate kizuya ekta wichasha bile wiapile. Chanku washte upi okia wo ushi talapo. Atukashila wakantaka tewi chashamelo omakia naha apetukile kiksiapo mitake pitio tiwahe oyateki mitawa naha oichakiapo. Hao mitake oasi.
Oh, Pedama Dex. Again, relatives, the last few weeks, you know, we had invited Tahashi Jeremy Redigo to join us for a discussion here for a 4-part series. The first week we had him on. We talked about some itazipe, the bow, how that relates to, I guess, our mental health culture. And then last week we talked a little bit about land-based learning, experiential learning. So that was really a good, healthy discussion. We got a lot of good feedback from that. So today, you know, we'll just discuss maybe a little bit about our language. We've already had at least one of our students on the Zoom call post some questions. Maybe we can get to those at some point. But what I would like to do is just give the floor to Tanshi, Jeremy, and Dekshi, Tommy, and kind of start us out here on wherever you want the discussion to go. And then maybe even towards the back end, we could do some more Q&A with some students, or if you guys want to address the questions that are in the chat box right away, you know, it's really up to you.
Oh, okay. I'll jump in there real quick, and then Jeremy, I'll turn it over to you, and you can follow up on some of the things that we're wishing to, I guess, get across. You know, one of the things, my philosophy has always been that for years and years, our language has been utilized politically by educational institutions, kind of patronizing us, like, and we've seen it, and I'm sure you've experienced it. Do they speak their language? Oh yeah, Wanshi, Nupa, Yamni, Dopa, Zapta, and they can count to 10. No actual, and they say, oh, that's good. And people have been hired in positions to try to convey a language, and that's all they know how to do is talk to count to 10 and do the colors, Sapa, Luta, Ska, whatever. And you see, Jeremy, I know that you're one of the language teachers over there and you're head of that department. And what we're wishing to accomplish is to try to get over that patronized attitude in which non-Indian people, not because they don't know how, but we want to share with them the understanding that, like, in our language, we understand there's no sarcasm in our language. It's a language of respect. We always try to carry that out in a good way. but yet those of us that speak it, we get made fun of, even by our own people, when we make reference to an older lady as mitui or unchi, stuff like that, or a younger man, toshka, or michinchi, or a gentleman that is of your father's age, you refer to him as ate or lekshi or dekshi. But you know, that's sad that our language is utilized in such a way that it seems like they're afraid of it. The other day, I put on one of my Facebook things. I love Facebook because it's drama. That's my entertainment. But I put on there, kill the Indian, save the man, and in parentheses, eh? Then I went down a couple of lines and I said, are you carrying a club or are you carrying a feather? Then I went down a couple of lines and I said, uh, what would you define as the club and what would you define as the feather? Eh? And then I went down a couple of lines and I asked, do you think this is a fair question? And I wanted to invoke or help people understand this attitude towards our people, to legitimately approach us with some sense of respect, because even when I was on the tribal council, it appeared I always had to legitimize myself because I was a traditionalist, eh? And there was an attitude of they didn't believe what I was saying, like I'm a noble savage. Oh, I want something, and here all I was doing, I want to give you something, share that with you. So now, with all that being said, Jeremy, uh, like I don't like calling like they referred to prayer songs. I don't like calling them prayer songs because they're not prayer songs per se. What the word that I use when I want to utilize a song that shares that energy, wakan iapi olonwa, slonoya, slonoya, how, wakan iapi olonwa, eh? And that makes reference, and it's not a prayer song, but we refer to them as prayer songs. And then in respects to um, this heaven or whatever, wachatanka, the spiritual energy, wo wachatanka, I would say. And that's that spiritual energy that exists up there where we transition to go. But see, that's my perspective. And people don't understand the contamination, even in our own usage of the words, how that affects our thought process. And the other day, I said the prayer that I pray in English, all in English, what I would say in my language, because I wanted them to understand how we think, how it comes from our heart, eh? I'm going to speak to you from my heart. And that's what our language represents. It's always respectful.
Home security with a pizza kit. No tools or wiring needed.
We're on the radio. But you see the basis that we're wishing to do is kind of apoliticize it, but at the same time be constructive and not let people take that and exploit it for their own benefits, for whatever that is. I don't know what it is, but that's why I said, are you carrying a club or are you carrying a feather? And so in that, it's not critical nor judgmental, but it's personal. You see, just food for thought as it relates to the importance of our language and how we are utilizing, even more so, like the old language compared to the new age language, a lot of the slang that's in there and whatnot nowadays, and it implies or infers that um, we're less than, as opposed to Nacha, or even knowing that system of Nacha or Itancha or whatever, and they lose sight of that because the manner in which they're speaking it, or they utilize it with the slang implement. So I just throw that out there just for the sake of discussion. Maybe that will help us understand the importance of how important it is for one to speak its language. And people think I speak fluently. I don't speak fluently. I speak what I know. And if you'll listen to it, I use Assiniboine words in my language as well, eh? And in that, I speak what I know. My uncle told me that. He said, share with the people that even if they say one word in their language, the grandfathers will help them, eh? So just thought I'd throw it out there. So what do you think, Toshka, Jeremy? How does that?
Washte, Tayan ha.
Oh,
Mish toka he da kori iwaekte. Homakshina he han dohni da kori nawakushni. Homakshina taha umaspe wachin. You know, I seldom heard the language growing up.
Yeah.
We had in Uncana from Fort Belknap, Harris Rock. So when we would gather for Memorial Day, you know, he would only talk in Indian. He'd talk loud. He'd talk like an Ayapaha. You know, so I was always taken back by that. I just really looked up to him for that. And other than that, maybe occasionally at the Wachipi, maybe when you were announcing, you know, things like that, I would hear the language and then in a Nipi. But aside from that, I never grew up really hearing it in the home or anything like that. But I always wanted my whole life to learn the language. So when we made the decision, Gumdrops and I, we made the decision 7 years ago to move back home to Siston here. And that was the sole purpose, was to learn the language. And what I did was I spent about 2 years, 2 years prior to that, preparing myself, knowing that I was going to go on this journey of learning my language. But I made the decision that I wasn't going to learn from books or from curriculum. And I'm not talking bad about those things whatsoever. But I made the decision I want to learn from our elders. So, Mish o tanka pighena ampetu cha obo hadakeche. You know, I visit with our elders daily, and that's how I taught myself to speak Dakota. So everything that you're talking about there, Dekshi, that's, you know, that's true. We see a lot of these things, and there's a lot of stuff connected to our efforts to bring our language back to life. And the foundation is always that we have to remember that it is sacred. The Dakota Apikinina Wakan, you know, our language is sacred. And that is usually also the foundation where people will first be exposed to it, is in a, you know, prayer form or in a nipi or, you know, wherever it may be. So I believe in really keeping that as my foundation. Homaksina hehan washichu echana wo hadakinaka washichu keri bedukcha. You know, growing up only speaking English, you know, I have that mindset. I have that mindset. You know, as I'm learning my language, my mind starts to change. The way I view the world, the way that I look at things. You know, over here, our elders, they say, you know, to look at it from a Dakota perspective or through Dakota eyes. Those are things you can't learn in books. Those are things you can't learn from colleges and universities. Those things can be resources and they can set you in the right direction. But the only way to really obtain that is by conditioning yourself. If you are somebody that didn't grow up with it, because see, our elders, they grew up with those things. They grew up in homes where only the language was spoken. So all of these things about being Dakota was just a part of who they are. Today, we have a resurgence of bringing back our cultural ways, which is good. But in that process, we have to acknowledge and that we were exposed and affected by outside society, you know? And so our thought process is a little different. Now, we can still have, may not ever fully, truly be and act and think like, you know, those from the outside society, but it's still disconnected from how maybe our elders view the world, because our language holds that world view. It really does. So if there's one thing that I would stress or to say is to learn your language from your elders and from your fluent speakers. You
know Earl, right? Bullhead?
Yeah.
Now, he used to work here in the language thing in the school system. They run him ragged here. They didn't realize they had a diamond in the rough.
Yep.
And, but one of the problems that we experienced there is the children would learn sentences, and then then we'd had these resources and we'd send them home, I say we, but it was Earl that was doing it, but he was helping me along too. And he'd send these resources home. But what happened was the parents were getting intimidated by their children speaking the language and they're not understanding it. And so they just push it off to the side. Eh? Oh, you don't need it. You speak English. Blah, blah, blah. And so that's why Toshka Elijah, that's why I'm thinking the college days, young mothers and fathers, it's important for them to understand that if they could grasp even to the thought of kind of understanding a few words here and there, it would really help their children, especially at a reservation level. And that's why I think like the process that has been patronized, like in the educational system, they oh well, learn your language and you'll do, and people got jobs for it, and they taught the language. Like I said, they that's what they expected. Oh, that's all right. That's good then. Okay, they do it, and then you're doing your job. Then okay, yeah, you earned your money, so to speak. But that wasn't fair to us, eh? Like that's what I'm saying is our people need to understand the importance of that, and at the same time, they need to understand that you don't need to assess or evaluate yourself as your ability to speak, but the thought or even your actions, eh? Judge me by my actions, not my words, eh? So that I said, remember when I said that, Elijah? And in that process, we come to understand the importance of thinking like an Indian, but at the same time, not denying that we live in a society that is pretty much controlled by non-Indian people. And so from that, that's why kill the Indian, save the man. Why do we continue to perpetuate that attitude, even in a contemporary time with all? That's why this virtual experience is a silver lining in this COVID cloud, that we can get it across to more people to help them understand the identity is key. And I know all three of us never grew up speaking the language, but on the other hand, we got introduced to it through ceremony, through Inipi, Sundance, whatever the case may be, powwow. We got introduced to it through that. And then the language became interesting. So you see, my point is, if we can develop our character to be courageous enough to represent that part of our life, then hey, there's nothing wrong with that. Without denying, eh? Without thinking we're better or we're less. We're not a noble savage, but yet we're the same. We're Indians, and in that process, Dakota Nakona Lakota means just that. We're your ally, we're your friend, and we can live that sort of a lifestyle. And people are not, especially our young people, are not understanding the importance of what you just said, Jeremy, because those are good words. And again, we're not denying an educational system, books or reading or stuff, but yet you get the spirit, like that inner thing, healing from the inside out sort of an aspect, and it affects you even more with some sense of commitment and sincerity to really understand the importance of it. And again, that's where we're letting somebody else control this curricular activity that goes on in our educational institutions that evolved from industrial revolution, which was totally chasing capitalistic imperialism based on kicking out factory workers. How much money can they make for me? Hey, that's very capitalistic. Whereas us, how much can I do to help you? Totally different, eh? Totally polarized attitudes, but at the same time, how can we bring them together? Is that making sense, Toshka Elijah? You see where I'm coming from? So there's a method to the madness, but yet the point of critical thinking is key. That represents individuality. As we look into the center from the circle, from the Changleshka, then you realize what part do I play? Why do I want to go sit on a hill in Ambleja, cry all night for a vision? Because you have a purpose and a dedication to bring you to that circle with the rest of us, eh? And again, it's totally inclusiveness. So in that sense, Jeremy, I think it's important that with that mindset of Dakota, Lakota, Nakona, whatever the case may be, they can understand we're just a Chasha. We don't want nothing from you, but we'll certainly help you when you're in times of need, eh? Whatever that need is, we would help you. So that's the difference. Whereas you go to a car salesman, he'll rip you off, man. But you see the difference, and it's not making. We need them. We need car salesmen too, but in their arena. But in ours, we need to protect that with that Indian thought process. Does that make sense, Toshka, Elijah? Let me throw that at you, because what we're doing here at the college level, there's a method to that madness, and we need to carry on for the sake of this leadership organization we're getting established, eh?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's like a how would I describe it? Like what I'm thinking is like there's multiple kind of levels to it too. I think moving forward, we want to have we want to be approachable with the language, so that way our Indian relatives and our non-Indian relatives, they feel welcome, and it's not like trying to learn the language is out of reach. And so we want to make that presentable, and so that's part of it. And then also there's parts of it to where I think, how do we utilize, like we were talking about the silver lining of like utilizing Zoom and technology. And I've noticed some of our elders, or even not just here, but that's just one of the I guess the byproducts of us almost being forced to go virtual with certain things. It isn't always necessarily a bad thing. I'm starting to see like Earl is in the fold with us now, man. Like we send him a laptop, we kind of walk through him. It's kind of I wouldn't say painful. It was a little slow process, man, but he's there now. And there's still little hiccups, but I think I like listening to other programs from other communities, what's successful, how can we maybe integrate that here? So there's like multiple things, different ways we can go about, I guess, either preserving the language, people that might be a little more advanced, how do we kind of capitalize on that as far as like preserving language, and I really liked Earl's presentations, his discussions, for like when he talks about the spirit of the song, right? Mm-hmm. Like, okay, you know that song, but do you have the spirit of the song? You know, and then so that's a really important concept. And same thing with language. He's really helpful. Even those little words, you know, he'll kind of break them down for us, and gives us that story behind the word that I think is important. That if exactly like Tanshi was saying, like if we're almost strictly book learners, then we're kind of depriving ourselves of those stories and the spirit of the language. And so, yeah, and so like. And I definitely don't pretend to know all the answers. I'm just trying to, even myself, keep an open mind. And then how can we, what's that term we were talking about a while back? Synthesize, create that synergy, right? To where we're taking the best of utilizing technology and archiving these things. And I know Tanshi Jeremy does a lot of recordings with elders. And in some ways, it'd be really cool if we could begin that process here a little bit. Like Fort Peck, we're kind of like, man, we got all of the Ocheti Shakoes. It's just right here, man. We have all different bands represented. And while we can, you know, time's ticking a little bit with some of our elders are getting kind of up there, you know, but we want to do it in a good way. How can we go about approaching them and bringing them into the fold with maybe they didn't have good experience with certain entities in the community? How do we kind of smooth out those relationships and to where we're able to, I guess, do it in a good way and archive those things and get learners caught up to speed. So
you see, Toshka, and again, Jeremy and Elijah, there's no form of racism because of the way we speak the language. It's respectful, and in that, there's no way that if you're a traditionalist, you can be a racist, because we're totally inclusive in that. You see, Puhu Nupa, that's the two-legged. That's totally inclusive of all human beings. I was sharing this the other day. It's hard to be an Indian, but I love my Indian ways. But what spiritually, that statement really means, it's hard to be human, but I love my human ways. If they transition it into something like that, they understand that inclusivity that we represent, to where we would definitely make a difference, to where like these things slow down because of COVID, everything slowed down. And I stepped away, I stepped back like off the tribal council because I wasn't affecting society in a good way, because I felt we were going too fast. And in that fast pace, we were leaving too much behind. And then of course, politically, they used it against me and said, well, all you do is hang around powwows and ceremonies, and you're not, like, I wasn't contemporary. I was, but nobody asked me. I had these different, but nobody asked me. And so in that process, I would like to try to prevent that from occurring again from any of our people, so that they understand, if you're Indian and you think like an Indian, you're not racist. There's no way you can be racist, because in our language, it's one of inclusiveness to help us understand it. Do you feel like that, Jeremy? Is that what you're coming to understand in respects to we can't be racist because we're so inclusive? How do you feel about that, Jeremy?
Yeah. In fact, this morning I was visiting with two of our elders, and we were my Tahanshi that I work with, he asked a question about Yowaja, and about like responsibility, or what you have a right to and what you don't have a right to. Anyways, when we ask these questions, we're trying to get deeper into the thought process of our fluent speakers, and how they think about things. But it just led into the discussion, and they said, yeah, a long time ago, like, we never talk bad about people.
No.
We never talk bad about people. You really can't talk bad about people in the language. They said we would tease, especially our brother-in-laws, things like that. So they started to talk about that, but they said, we never talk bad about each other. And then they brought up, like the idea of an orphan. They said a long time ago, it was never an issue, because somebody would just naturally take these kids in and raise them. It didn't matter. And so they really share about how things were at Hana, when they were young.
A lot of our weekday would do that. They would take on the children, and people don't understand that either, eh?
Yeah.
Just throw it out there. Go ahead, Jeremy.
Yeah. So that's what we're up against today, is everything that we experience today. And people sometimes people turn it into traditional and non-traditional, or Christian, or full blood and half breed, and or urban and res, and all these things. But the reality is that this stuff was inflicted on our people for intentionally
learned behavior.
Yes. And so we are now doing that to ourselves, and we don't even know it. We don't even realize that that's what we're doing. So in this journey of, healing, which it has different parts to it. One of them is just your history of where you come from and who you are.
Yeah.
And then the other is, reconnecting with your ceremonial ways. Even if you are a Christian person, changing your outlook that these Indian ways aren't evil or bad.
No.
That this is who we are and where we come from. Well, even if you choose a different faith, I respect that.
Yeah.
But get beyond that trauma of what was done to us to make us think that our Dakorwi Choha is Shicha, And then the language is going to start. I think that's the next level of really why, like what you said about the parents, that maybe because they're intimidated by it. That is one of the most truthful statements you can say when it regards to our language, is how the shame that is connected to it. And what I have found in my own personal experience is that deep down inside, our people want to learn their language. They want to speak their language. It's just so intimidating, and you feel less than, because you don't know those things, and it makes you feel like you don't know who you are as a Dakota person.
Yeah.
That's the way I see it. And so once we can help to get beyond that, and then they start to learn and they start to know things, because it's proven fact with the kids. If we take these kids and we put them in immersion school and we raise them with their language and their culture, all of these things connected to it, their self-esteem is going to change. They're going to have that self-esteem. They're going to have that confidence in who they are. When they finish school, they're going to be able to stand in front of crowds of people and speak and not be ashamed of that, because it's that identity. So when we take that away, one of our elders here, he says, no matter what they ever do, no matter what they do, no matter where you move or what you do, you'll never be Washichu. Okay, so But at the same time, if you don't feel like you are who you are, because our educational system, you know, your whole 12 years in school, they're teaching you something that is not relevant to who you are as a person.
Yeah.
It's all from outside society. So that already is tampering with that self-esteem and that understanding of who you are as a Dakota person. And then on top of it, you go in, I've seen this with my own eyes. A fluent speaker will say, and this is can even be an individual that even, you know, goes by our ways, but they don't know the language. One time I was in a room with these elders, and one of my Tahashi, he come in and he sat down, and one of the elders looks at him and says, Nitwe. And he instantly just put his head down. He didn't attempt to answer. He, you know, and it was the shame. I seen it, and I felt bad for him. But the elder wasn't being any way about it. He was just asking him who he was.
Yeah.
And so later I pulled him aside and I said, Tahashi, I said, don't ever get shamed out by it. They know, they understand. I says, just ask him, you know, even if you have to ask him in English, but in Dakota, Dakuyaka or whatever, you know, I says, ask them what they mean. They're here to help us and to share with us. But you could see that shame come over him because he didn't know what that old man said to him.
But you see, Jeremy, now that's the problem. And that's what I recognize. That's why I think it's important for us to get to these young mothers and young fathers at an early age to help them understand what they're doing with the identity they've taken on based on that indoctrination that you're talking about, that shame and that guilt, until you're courageous enough to overcome that. And you do that based on your ability to develop your character. Okay? Remember, Toshka, Elijah, we talked about Ohiesa, and in that, what he wanted to share with the people, the white people, on how important the character development was. So he's one of the originators of Boy Scouts. That's what it is, character development. And so that's what we need to do here within our reservation for them to get that courage. You know, make yourself strong, and because your relatives are depending on you. And in that dependence, we got to explain why we're saying that. You know, there's nothing wrong with being ethnocentric. And in that identity factor, we got to find how we can represent not only ourselves, but our families and our tribes, and actually culturally people that have been colonized throughout the whole world, Makasi Tomini, that how it's been affected them as well. So that's what I'm talking about, ethnocentrism. You know, being ethnocentric there's not a problem with that. Look at the Jewish people. You know, they get along just quite well, but they've maintained their cultural value system. We can do that too. And in that process, we can overcome that guilt and that shame, and we can, like me, somebody says something to me in Indian and I don't know. I said, well, you got to tell me in English. What would you say? And oh yeah, I knew you said that, but you know, you got to understand, I'm learning, and they got to go beyond that. Just the manner in which you shared it, Jeremy. That's exactly what needs to happen. So, like me, I understand more than I speak, but yet each time I speak with a speaker of the Dakota, Lakota, and Lakota, I pick up one word, two words, something like that. Oh, the beauty in that learning, even as old as I am, I say, whoa, cool, man. But you see, and that generates your self-esteem, your self-respect from the inside out. That's the difference. They're not acknowledging the diversity that we represent as it relates to overcoming that learned behavior. And it's so kill the Indian, save the man attitude that we think we got to side with him to belong with it. No. We understand the duality, I guess, that exists there, eh? The white man's world and our world. And then our worldview will expand big time. We'll have both of those. So that's what I'm trying to help us all understand. Me and Earl were talking about this morning. He gave me a call this morning, but we were talking about that. How can we go forward? And we were talking about that because we want to establish some sort of a lesson plan or something like that, Toshka, Elijah, for that leadership crew, that so that they're progressively get stronger as it relates to looking inwardly, accepting that responsibility of being a human being, as opposed to looking outwardly and blaming people and making excuses, eh? because if we're going to represent, we got to understand it starts from here first, from the inside out. Does that make sense to you guys?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh. that character development, I think, is key. You know, that's really huge. And those are things that I think about in this process. Is at Hana, we had a structure. You know, we had everything was in place. They talked about that this morning too, about the aunties and the uncles. You know, they were the ones that correct you. They were the ones to, you know, and by doing that, you don't damage your relationship with your parents. Now we have a single mom or a single dad in a lot of cases, and they have to be the disciplinary, they have to be the friend, they have to be all these things to their children. Yeah. So at Hana, there was a balance to them, and those aunties and uncles were the ones that would keep a child in line because we lived with each other. And nowadays that's different, and it's really affecting a lot of things. And then we look at our, I was at a meeting down in Rosebud last week. They had a meeting on the language. And, you know, sometimes we always hear this comment that our language doesn't belong in the schools. And I see where some of our elders come from that might say that, but this is because we live in a different time. I think we have to, our thinking has to change with that sometimes. But this is my thoughts. Our language may not belong in these schools.
There you go.
But we need to change our educational system. I think America needs to change its educational system, but we as tribes definitely need to change our educational system. So here in Siston, we have 2 tribal schools, 2 BIE schools, right? So language and culture is a big part of them. But even then, when you really get into looking at how these schools are structured, they're still mimicking Western society of education. So I always go back to talk about how, because I take pride in this on Fort Belknap at Chiatahan, you know, how we do our feeds, you know, when they, you know, the Hobug Hena Oyate, you know, they serve the food. Mm-hmm. And I'll never forget Dekshi Ken Ryan. He told me this one time. He offered me tobacco and he asked me to serve. And he says, you can't be a leader until you serve the people. So growing up, I always helped. I always witnessed this and seen it, and that's stuck in my mind. And we go back and we learn about the Omaha Okura Kichie, you know, or these different societies and how the structure and the placement, you know, the positions that people held, they were held accountable. They were held accountable to those things and to the people and our leadership. You know, the Tancha, Wichashte Atampi, all of those, you know, they were held accountable to the people. Whereas today, those are changing, or it's the opposite, you know? Yeah. And so I think, how can we educate our young people, create our own schools and educate them by building that character development, by incorporating those things?
Yeah. You make them strong based on their character development, firstly, and then they can become strong enough to represent, okay? So we had it backwards. We start trying to teach the language, wishing that they would identify. And to some, they don't want to hear the language, but if you help them to become stronger from within, that character development, exercising those virtues, generosity, compassion, empathy, love, caring, sharing, all those virtues, giving them that opportunity to exercise them in a manner in which is good for them, because then it's to make them a better person. But they've always taken that for granted. Because we're Indians, they think we're noble savages. We beat up our wife, we're going to get drunk. And you hear school counselors, kids come out of school that are Indian say, oh, the counselor said, I'm just going to end up on welfare and have a lot of kids anyway, so I don't have no reason to go to college. They tell them that, and they live with that, and it sticks in their brain, and they feel that, well, that's that learned behavior. That's what they think of me, so that's what I'm going to become. And so how do we overcome that? Well, that's what I'm saying. It's got to start from the parents. Parents are the first teachers, regardless of what we may think. And then it goes on to, after they get 3 to 5 years old, they go to the uncles and the aunties that won't speak. But and in that, we realize the responsibility, the parents as the first teachers, usually the mother will instill in them survival techniques. That's the beginning of their character development. And that's just instinctive. But how do we get that together and help the women understand? In our Lakota societies, we're matriarchal. and a lot of men that are ego-fied and narcissistic, misanthropic or whatever they call it, they get an attitude, they get cognitive dissonance because they're insecure about letting that go. The women are held high in high regard in our societies and in our culture. But in that process, we're thinking like non-Indian people when we think like that. You're thinking like a white man. That's what my dad used to tell me. He said, "Oh, you think like a white man now, my son." I said, "No, I'm not." He said, "Yes, you are." And he helped me understand the difference, in my decision-making process. And then that's where, like I shared that with Elijah. I said, "Now think like an Indian. Now think like an Indian." and he's always saying, "Oh, okay, okay." And then he gets it. Oh yeah, because it's instilled in him. He already knows, And so in his pursuit of his doctorate, that's what I'm saying. There's nothing wrong with thinking like that program that you're involved in, but don't forget the Indian perspective, and make sure that you can make it work for you in a good way, because again, it addresses that nagi, that spirit of who we are. But at the same time, you can hang with the big dogs over here too, in their society. But that's what this is like the Buffalo Chaser Society. We're trying to establish that it's totally inclusive, all Indians and non-Indians coming onto the Fort Peck Community College to help them understand their responsibility to that representation of the Buffalo Chaser Society. Indians and non-Indians, male and female, because there's a way to do it. And that's where Earl is going to help us understand some of those responsibilities as we look inwardly. Am I representing in a good way? Because then it becomes a personal choice. If you want to, fine. If you don't want to, that's fine too. But in that process, that's why we're not teaching them how to be Indians. We're trying to help them to understand the importance of mitaki epi brehichiapo, nitaki epi wachiniakao, and understand what we're saying there. My relative, make yourself strong because your relatives are depending on you, especially their children, to represent that behavior that would represent that commonness in how we pursue life, and we prepare ourselves for that mystery of death to someday soon go and be with our relatives on the other side to make that transition. Not fear it, but prepare for it. We're prepared for anything, But when we say it in a spiritual way, we mean prepare yourself for death, And be good to everything and everybody as well as you can, not according to somebody else's standards. So as we do these things, the development of character is key. I think it's first and foremost, but that's my opinion because of what I've been through. And then once they get courageous enough and brave enough, they'll go beyond that shame and that guilt and recognize, hey, I'm learning. I'm pitiful. Don't. Could you help me? What did you say? Stuff like that. Ask the question in respect to that. So, like when I go to sweat, I always try to say one word, and I ask the leader usually, how do you guys say I'm really tired? Because I would say machba, machba, and then the leader would say, well, we say machna, the Cinnabons, I said, oh, that's it, yeah, that makes sense. I said, so, but then all the rest that are sitting in there, they'll remember that word, And that's one more word they can add to their rule. So I just do that on my own. They don't know what I'm doing, but I just say that because to help them understand, even if you're saying one word, it's important. Even if you just know Tukashila or Mitugashi or whatever in reference, that's good. Just say that word. That's the only one you need. Wachikia or whatever in that scenario. But if we can develop their character, then I think we can get back to going beyond that industrial revolutionary attitude as it relates to our educational institutions that are really perpetuating that manifestation way back in the day. Lila here, honey, back in Europe, But that's where it was established. And then we come to understand being able to be divergent in our thought process to incorporate a curriculum that would benefit everybody, not just Indians. You see what I'm saying? Does that make sense, Elijah? Elijah?
Yeah.
You see? And so the method to the madness is really like, I'm sharing this with y'all because I ain't gonna do it. Many people in the past have attempted it and tried it, but the system is just bumping heads. They're so strong and so forceful in their manner, and we're just kind of not apathetic, but we're not passive either. But at the same time, it represents that individuality as opposed to individualism, which represents capitalistic beliefs. I, me, my. I can do this. Me, I'm going to do this. I did this. That's individualism. That's negative characteristic development as it relates to what we're trying to pursue. And individuality is us, we, and them. Where's my position in the circle, and what can I do for the sake of the greater good, sort of a thing. What do you think about that? No, there's a lot to think about, but I wanted to throw that out there for you guys to help you understand, like as opposed to prayer. Alone. That's something that I'm going to sing that's going to be filled with this spiritual energy, so to speak, from a natural process. What do you think of that, guys?
Yeah. Dakori apiki naku dakori chochan aki checha. They're the same thing, and so, and just for, I guess, for people that are listening that, maybe they haven't started, this journey in their life, who knows, but these things are connected, and that's why it's important that we're talking about both simultaneously, the language and, our wichochan, our way of life, but yeah, I think that's the number one question is how can we go forward into the future to make sure how are they going to walk in the future with these teachings in this way of life, the character development, or the standards that our people used to hold, our not just our young people, but our people in general, the standard that they were held to, whether you're a leader or whatever the situation may be. So how do we utilize that foundation to help us to bring our language back to life? Because I think you're right, in other circles or in other ways, it might be the other way around, where they're attempting to learn this, but they don't have that connection or that foundation with our elders, our people in our communities that, possess that thought process and that way of doing things. Because you definitely can't learn those things from books.
See,
and I'm not saying that we can't utilize those books, but we're not gonna learn our character development through those books.
See, that's what I'm saying about that divergent thinking. And again, we can incorporate these things, but like I said, they were so strong, like the school boards, they fight that because they're afraid of what might happen and da da da. But we're so inclusive. That's why I say Indians aren't racist. They can't be racist if they believe in their hochokan, if they have that understanding of that, because it's totally inclusive. But at the same time, they need to understand there's book sense and there's also common sense. And that's where many of ohiesa, you got to say ohiesa. You got to say that sa like that. That's what Earl told me anyway. But champion. But we got to understand the importance of that balance, that linear teaching as well as that abstract book sense as well as common sense makes them a better person. They'll become that better person, and that has nothing to do with race or anything like that. It has a lot to do with understanding, not so much as acquiring knowledge, but acquiring that understanding to go along with that knowledge.
Oh,
Makes sense, Elijah?
I think we're getting towards the back end of the program here. I did want to give the students, I guess, an opportunity before we lose our guest speaker here. He's got a lot of other things going on too, but let's see, I'll pick one of these questions here. Becky's lighting us up. Conjugation, invite educators. I was also hoping you could discuss how to introduce words and phrases to non-natives trying to learn. Like, what is the best way to introduce so they learn? Do you teach a story where, well, we've kind of covered some of this, Becky. I was listening to an old it was TED Talks. I think it was Art Shamble, former president of Sitting Bull College. I think he would do like an introduction. You know, he would talk about Chantewa Shtea Na Pe Chiuzapi. That's kind of a real standard greeting. I usually say it a lot, but those little things I think are helpful. Becky, when you listen at how you introduce yourself is important. Sometimes it's philosophical. The language is, and from my experience, is naturally a little different. But I think learning to introduce yourself is super important. And I don't know if you gentlemen have any thoughts on that. But Becky is from what used to be known as Glacier, when they used to have glaciers over there. But she's over there, and she's like clockwork, man. Every time we have a presentation, she's here and she's asking questions. So,
but one of the things I just want to throw out there is English language. If you know other languages, it's spoken backwards. English is spoken backwards because the action word usually comes at the end in all these other languages. And so the conjugation of the verbs is probably one of the key and first and foremost things that you'll need to understand. And we do have that, and we do that. I know Jeremy probably say that as well. But the conjugation of the verbs is key, and it's probably one of the first and foremost things that you'll learn in learning the language. But English is spoken backwards according to every other language that you try to speak. It's backwards. Would you agree to that, Jeremy? Tushka?
Yeah. And conjugation is huge because in Dakota, so we have like our verbs, right? Like verbs are, and I even had to relearn what a verb was when I started learning the language. But you have action and state of verbs, the conjugation in those can get so advanced that you can say less. You can say 2 words in a sentence, and create sentences that would take you 4 or 5 or 6 words in English.
Yeah.
Because of the way that we conjugate our verbs. And then there's even words that we have that shouldn't even be verbs, but we make them verbs. That's just how Dakota works. So if you are somebody who's starting to learn, there's a basic sentence structure, thing plus action, thing plus description. That's Dakota structure of the language on a basic level. But then the conjugation of verbs, that is the majority of our language. That's how you're going to be able to get your point across, is how you conjugate those verbs. Because if you don't conjugate them right, they'll think you're talking about something else or somebody else. So that's going to be the biggest thing to learn when you're starting to learn Dakota.
And there was one speaker I was working with when I very first started learning Dakota. He's from Cannonball. He used to live here, but he moved away. He said it almost takes a lifetime to learn some of those verbs. Like you can conjugate like certain verbs, like 1 up to like 28 different ways. It's like, holy smokes, man. I'm still working on the basic 4 that you can do. I, me, you, all that type of stuff. So it's very advanced, but I try and keep things basic, and Tanshi Jeremy's had a good philosophy, try and keep it real. That's how I look at it anyways, to keep it simple, conversational things, that just basic things, not to try and go above, but not like there isn't a place for that. But just mastering basic conjugations is kind of where I'm at. And so one of I think the cool takeaways for any of our students that are listening, naturally we offer classes here at the college, whether it's Assiniboine language or Dakota language. Please utilize those. Summer schedule is out already for the summer. And then for fall, it'll be out very shortly. And so those are opportunities for you. I think it's super important to, I think that what they say is like there's 4 components, I guess, of learning. There's hearing it, speaking it, reading it, and writing it. So that's what my recommendation is. A number of years ago, Hunga Robert Forstar was my first language teacher. Like Jeremy, I listened to some of these guys like Tommy on the mic, Hoka, hey, headshot too. I always listen to Palas, for Belknap. I was like, oh man, watched it. And so that's an introduction, but I think formal classes, it's all good, and he was a first language speaker and kind of piqued my interest, and then, taking some languages in Dakota as well. So, but if you have access to a first language speaker, man, that's like gold. Enhance those relationships, go out of your way to do that. If you don't have access, take a class, but I think blending both, like with like researching, but also trying to make connections with elders is probably super important. Take advantage of it while we can. Any other closing comments, gentlemen, regarding language? If there's any like words of inspiration for any of these up and coming language warriors, we don't want to. I always want to encourage them, no matter where they're at, whether they have limited speaking proficiency or they're still trying to get to the next level. Or is there any things, resources you'd recommend?
Well, I'll just say, for one, anybody that's learning, just keep doing it. Keep doing it. Don't ever give up. And whatever your resources are, utilize them. If you have access to speakers, make those relationships, because that's what's going to help you go to the next level with it, both on a speaking ability, like the authenticity of it, but also through our way of thinking. So, and don't ever put an expectation on a fluent speaker to teach you to speak Indian. What you do is you build a relationship with them. You use what little bit you have, and it's going to naturally grow from there. You as a learner have a responsibility to learn from them, not them having a responsibility to teach you. Because our fluent speakers, they know how to teach the language, but they don't know how to teach it in the structure of how we're conditioned to be taught today.
Yeah.
They teach it by speaking and sharing. We learn by listening and taking it in, even if it means figuring it out later on down the road.
Yeah.
So that's, and our speakers are leaving us at a rapid rate. We have very few now. So I encourage anybody, go spend time with them, because even just hearing them say a few little things, that's real. That's and in a couple of years, we may not be able to hear that anymore.
What I like to share is when you go to an older person, should all try to have tobacco, in a good way, and share it with them. But don't go there expecting anything. Go there and spend time with them. Clean their yard, or just visit with them, have coffee with them. If they got an appointment to go to, give them a ride, take them there. Even if it's a long ways away, go over there and drive over, because your visit with them is going to be, again, important. Let them know, hey, well, I'm kind of interested in the language. Well, he'll pursue that, or she will pursue that in a manner that you'll be able to understand, and they'll understand what you really want, as opposed to driving them to their appointment or cleaning their yard. They'll come out and they'll share stories with you and whatnot, and do stuff like that. But always don't go there and give them tobacco and expect them to tell you something, teach you something. That's not good. But that's what they teach us to do, eh? And actually, what the tobacco is, it's not an expectation of getting something from them for the tobacco. It's just an indication of respect. Maybe that elder or that older person needs coffee. Take them a can of coffee. They might need bread. Take them some bread, something like that, can of soup or something. Something they could utilize in a good way. That's also an indication of respect. Once you develop that relationship, and then they'll just welcome you. You'll develop that rapport. You'll get that understanding, and then they don't, the old man or the old lady don't have to question you. What do you want? Because you'll tell them, I'm interested in the language. And then when you go, you'll find that it's such a comforting relationship that you'll establish, because they want to share. They know the need. Like I said, many people have tried to get into this system and help our people understand without imposing or infringing on your right to exist. Okay? That's an indication of respect as well. But if you go there and they understand your needs, they'll share it with you in a good way, a story or whatever, and they'll say it in the language. Like my grandpa, his name was Lala Joe Feinboy. Always spoke the language all the time. As I don't understand the Korea. He said, "No, you understand. You know you didn't." He'd speak English, eh? But he'd always speak the language first, all the time. And then my dad would get mad at him and say, Christ, Joe, I know you speak English. You were in the army. But Joe was quite the guy. He's quite the character, because even him at those times, many, many years ago, he would try to always make it important to us to understand our language, eh? So that's how you approach old people. don't tell them what to do or tell them you got to tell me now or something like that. But just kind of understand the importance of the respect that they would really appreciate, and that's an indication of wanting to learn the language with some sincerity and commitment. Ah, echitala. Mama knishta.
Pramadesh, Pramya Tahash. So yeah, so hopefully listeners, especially our students, take advantage of these opportunities. If we ever have any more of these events, check them out, develop your networks. And I think that's how you'll be able to make your own connections. For Pet Community College, we're a resource for you. Please take advantage of all these awesome opportunities. I remember sometimes speakers are in different areas. Sometimes it might not necessarily be in places you might expect. It might be at the casino. So if they like to gamble, go grab a hundo and go gamble with them. I remember how it actually likes to gamble. I remember even I lived in Rapid City. There was even some of the street people were fluent, and so I mean, just think of that without having any expectations, like you said, but what they might look like or who they might be. Just approach things with an open mind. I think it's all good. So, medakiapi doksta kewachia kapikte.
Oh, Duksha.
Uksha.
Hey ha ya hey ha ya hey ya hey yo hey ha ya hey ya hey ya yo hey yo hey ha ya hey Fort Beck Community College, yo, me too, gashi, dagush, kashka, yogi, no, yo, wata, pebi, hagi, tabi, ihachi, ya, bino, hey, yo, hey ha ya hey ha ya hey yo hey yo hey ha ya hey yo hey ha yo hey ha ya hey Fort Beck Community College, yo, me too, gashi, dagush, kashka, yogi, no, yo, wata, pebi, hagi, tabi, ihachi, ya, bino, hey, yo, hey ha ya hey ha ya hey yo hey yo hey ha ya hey yo hey yo hey yo hey ha ya hey Fort Beck Community College, yo, me too, gashi, dagush, kashka, yogi, no, yo, wata, pebi, hagi, tabi, ihachi, ya, bino, hey, yo, hey ha ya hey yo hey yo hey ha ya hey yo hey yo hey hey ha ya hey ha ya hey ha ya hey ha hey yo hey yo hey yo. Fort Peck Community College, Ukiepido yo me to gashi dagush kashka yogi piano yo wata pepe hagik tabi ihachi ya pino hey yo.
Buffalo Chasers podcast Thursdays from 3 to 4 p.m.
There you go, man. Oh, look at that.